So let's welcome to our activity to Dr. Ollerenshaw and thank him for sharing his experience with us. Jeremy, this is yours.
Great, thank you, Dr. Diaz, and I'm very pleased to be invited to give a talk today. Thank you again. And I'm not sure if I can see everybody. I may be able to. But I would like to make this interactive, and I am going to ask if you have questions to just please stop me along the way and just ask me questions, and I'll be asking you questions as well. So what I'm going to do first is just to give you a little bit of background about myself and a little bit about my journey and how I got here, and then I'll give you some scenarios because my journey was in some ways a little bit unconventional, and but I think everybody finds their own journey unconventional. But I'll tell you about mine, and then I'll open it up, and I'd like to hear about some of the experiences you have and some of the aspirations that you have and desires of moving into your career, whether it be academic or in industry. And really that's what I want to focus in on today is, what are the decisions for going into either of those roles with a bioengineering specialty. So a little bit about my background then. I was raised in the UK and about 250 miles north of London, and went to a college there and did my first college attendance. It wasn't a bachelor's degree, it was a diploma that was weighed heavily on the experience in industry side. So I had a year out in industry, which was more like an internship, an extended internship in the middle of that course, which gave me the first flavor of the outside world and working in academia. So I was doing a applied biology course, and I moved into a university department. It was a research department in Sheffield, which was in the north part of England, and worked in the Department of Therapeutics. And we did clinical studies there, and I got exposure to a lot of bioanalytical techniques and learned a lot of analytical techniques from clinical samples, which was which enabled me to be involved in my first publication, because the work that we did there over the year eventually got published in one of the clinical journals. So that was my first exposure to that type of academic environment, and I knew pretty early on in those days that that's what I wanted to do as a career. I, even before that, had a desire to work in a laboratory, whether it was a clinical laboratory or in a hospital or some other kind of laboratory. I think I was just wired to want to understand how things worked. So sort of fast forwarding a little bit, so to the end of that diploma that I did, and that first experience in academic world, the academic research environment. I was then finished that course and was out looking for a job, and looking for a job is always fairly stressful. And at the time, it was a little bit like what we've just been through recently, and jobs were scarce for new graduates, and it was difficult to find that first job. And I had not at that time had the opportunity to go into like a master's degree, graduate school. And so I was looking for my first job, and I landed a job at a university department, very similar to what I did my internship in, and was able to work that job, but also register with the university for a PhD, which was a little bit unusual, being able to work a full-time job and do a PhD at the same time. And that's what I was able to do at the University of Leicester. It made it that it took longer to actually complete the PhD, but it had the advantage that I was using all the work that I was doing during the daytime in the lab, which was basically preclinical work and human volunteer work, measuring, again, bioanalytical samples, looking at components of blood and biological fluids, mainly in looking at hypertension, which was the interesting part of the department. We're really solidly focused on that illness. And I was able to work through 6 years at the university there, but working in the university lab. And everything I did in the lab, I could pick and choose as to what I used for my final dissertation, which was great, because you weren't really crunched for time to do that. And so I had everything to choose from to write up. And so that was finishing up my dissertation. And I was able to, during that period of PhD, I learned an awful lot. A lot of techniques in the lab, which I was able to use later on as I moved into, for me, into industry. And I went to conferences, I published papers, and I had a really good mentor. And that was kind of one of the key pieces of this, is having a mentor that's able to be an advocate for you and pushing you to the, a little bit to the extremes, a little bit outside your comfort zone, in presenting, to writing papers, going to meetings, interacting with with your peers at meetings, talking to physicians, and getting into the very technical aspects and learning how to do that exchange, that technical exchange, and all the minutiae and the little keys of having that kind of technical conversation. So after that period at the PhD, then it became, it was a kind of watershed time for me, is the decision time. Now, I'm going to stop here for a moment and just ask you if any of you have really made any decisions, any preconceptions of what you want to do after graduate school, if you've decided to stay into academia, or if you really have any decisions on what you want to move into as far as industry. Is industry really attractive? And if so, what area of industry, and how far have you planned ahead career-wise? I don't know if anybody is wanting to talk about that, but go ahead.
Anyone with plan? I know a couple of students already that have been considering the industry as one of the options. So I will bring some name here. Carolina.
Hello. Yeah, so yeah, I've always been more inclined to industry, kind of since I started grad school. So that hasn't really changed much. Staying in academia would just be like just another option there.
Yeah. And what kind of what aspect of industry are you really drawn to?
So I like more the research and development aspect, more focusing a lot in medical device development, which is very associated also with my dissertation. So
good. Have you identified any companies that you wanted to start to engage with, to chat to about potential positions? Or
so the search I've done so far is actually a little bit preliminary. I do have to spend more time looking at these companies, so and just have a better idea there.
Okay, good. Is there anybody else that has made decisions?
Hi, yes. Sorry, I had to move because my guinea pigs were causing a ruckus. But I had just recently got involved with a program with Georgia Tech. It was the Regional I-Corp program. basically to help you explore your value propositions and your customer segments, and come up with a good business model. And I hadn't had any experience before, but I found that it was pretty interesting, and I've enjoyed it so far. So it's something that I've continued on. I've looked at another program, and we're looking to do one in the summer for NSF. So definitely looking to explore this further on the industry side.
Is that related to medical device development and from concept through to approvals and marketing?
Yes. So right now we're very early stage, so we're really just in that customer exploration stage still. We do have a device, a working device, but we're still looking to adapt that to what the needs of the market are. Specifically, we're looking at remote patient monitoring. Okay,
that sounds pretty cool. There's a group out at Stanford that I was put in touch with probably about a half a dozen years ago, and they actually published a book called Biodesign, and they have a website, and they have an awful lot of material straight out of the book that's on the website, and you can use it to guide you through those pieces that you were just describing of concept through to, how do you, what is the need in the market, and then what is the concept you can put together, and then going through customer feedback and so on, all the way through to design and through to development. And I think it's called biodesign.org is the name of the website, but I could probably get that information to you somehow.
Sure, that'd be great. Thanks.
Anybody else have any strong desires for industry or staying with academia?
Hi, I'm Valentina Dargam. I always thought I wanted to stay in academia, but I don't know if it's just the fact that being in academia turns me off from staying in academia. It's one of those things like when you're in
grass is always greener, right?
Right. And maybe if I do never end up going to academia, I'll probably miss it, right? But yeah, I also did an I-Corps program. And I think it'd be great to start my own company. I don't know if that's something that I'll do as soon as I'm done with my PhD, but I think that's something that I'll be interested in.
Yeah, that sounds great. I was fortunate to be able to start a company just a few years ago, and it hasn't done a whole lot, unfortunately, just because I got a little distracted and my colleagues got a little distracted. But the actual mechanics of starting a company is not all that difficult. Just starting a corporation, incorporating in the state of Delaware, and putting all the paperwork together, it's not that hard. And there's so much information out on the internet to use to figure out how to do it and get all the paperwork right. Yeah, I'd encourage that. I think one piece of advice is knowing pretty much exactly what you want to develop before you start the company so that you can launch right into it. Otherwise, it just kind of lingers.
Right. I figured starting it's the easy part. You need like a couple $100s, but actually, having money to start it, and having employees other than yourself, free labor, that would be the hard part, right? And also, like you said, having a product.
Yeah, a concept. What's really critical is to have intellectual property, and then really that's the key. Whether you license it from somewhere else or if you have it yourself, that's really the key to base the company on, and that can go a long way as far as collateral for later exits and opportunities. Good. Let's see. So I did put a couple of slides together here. I think I can bring them in.
Dr. Ollerenshaw, this is Ranu Jung, chair of the department. As I'm listening to you and the students are asking questions, maybe perhaps you could give some idea if the students are thinking about starting their companies, and you said having IP is necessary. how do they manage that while they are grad students? Because some of their own PhD work could form the basis of these companies, and they could be entrepreneurs. So what would be your advice to them of how much should they get into this startup culture, entrepreneurship stuff while they're still doing graduate school work?
Yes, that's a great question. And a lot of the answer to that will lie in the university's policies on intellectual property development by students, because some universities will want to keep everything that's developed within the university, especially if it's university equipment and labs. Then a lot of universities say then that whatever you do in that equipment and lab is mine, belongs to the university. But the way around it, I think, would be to have the students go through some kind of licensing option with the university. So they have the option to use the intellectual property as a license from the university. If the university owns it, then the students have some preferred license agreement with the university.
Is that something that's like, I know, for example, let's say you file a patent, at least this is how it works with FIU, right? You file like a patent, and then there's the inventors of the patent. And I know like faculty have certain paperwork, like saying, okay, how they will deal with licensing, I would assume. But graduate students, I think it's a little bit different, right? Because we don't have those kind of conversations when you come in as a graduate student with like tech transfer office. So is that something that you have to like talk about, separately from filing a patent and just, ownership of the patent as a graduate student? Do you have any idea about that?
Yeah, I've actually, so this company I mentioned that I started with some colleagues, last year, like the middle of last year, I started discussions with one of the universities to license some technology. And I had a lot of interaction with the team that developed the technology working at the university. And they have the opportunity to develop further the technology. Their name is on the patent as the inventors, but they're not what they say is the assignee. The assignee is the university. And so they couldn't go out and license the technology under that patent, and they couldn't really do much with it without having a separate agreement with the university, a license with the university to do that. So you are inventors of the patent, and of course your name's all over the patent, but you're not the assignee. It's assigned to, in that case, it was the university, and in your case, it would probably be FIU. So I think you're right. There'll be a separate discussion to have.
Yeah, I think Valentina, this is Ranu speaking. I think, and Dr. Ollerenshaw, maybe you could separate out what is patent versus licensing. And we're in the same boat, faculty or graduate students. Graduate students are basically employees, and we are faculty are employees. So we're governed by the same rules. But perhaps you might comment about the difference between putting in patents and then licensing, but perhaps you, Valentina, may think of licensing the patent she is on when she starts her company. So,
yes.
So maybe you can expand on that a little bit.
Yeah,
and grad students too.
And I think there is I don't think there's really one answer that covers every university. I think every university is going to be slightly different and have different options to handle it. The patents can be filed by employees of the university or graduate students at the university. And it'll be filed under the university. The university will be what they call the assignee, so they'll own it. The inventors will be the students or the employees, and those names will be on the patent as the inventors. Now, to be able to make use of that IP, it can either be used by the assignee, so it will be the university, or it can be licensed by the university to whoever. So it could be licensed to the employees at the university or the graduate students to go out and start a company around. And that probably that license will be at a very favorable, under favorable terms, much more favorable terms than, say, if I was coming in to license that same patent. So as an inventor, you may actually have, very preferential terms to be able to license it from a university. And I'm not a patent attorney, so I'm trying my best to answer these questions.
I have, on myself, I think I may have maybe an example that cover both aspects here. So the pattern that I have with the electroencephalogram, cap. So when three members, one student and 2 faculty are part of this pattern, and I believe you have to declare the percentage of ownership or intellectual property that you have in this pattern. So in my case was a 60%, then a 30% and a 10% for the student. So that is, in this case, the university is the as you mentioned, the institution that manage any contract or any negotiation with that patent. And so when you license, so I have a company in the United States that licensed that patent, and they get what is called an annual fee that they have to pay to the university, and then they have what is called the royalty, and the royalty would be distributed according to that percentage. So something like that is what I have experienced. You could be the same person that owned the patent could be the person that have a business that licensed the patent. So I don't think there is rule for that. But at the end, the cycle should be whenever the company pays the royalty, their royalty is distributed. I believe at FIU, when I have the first meeting, that percentage that the FIU will take was a 26%, and the other percent of the royalty will go to the owners of the patent, and then will be distributed according to the percentage that was filed.
Yeah, I think, Jorge, now the percentage, if you are on a patent, there is no preferential. It's equally distributed amongst all patent holders.
Mm.
So the licensing fee may be different, but the any royalties that might come, it's equal distribution, and the lab gets something also. So you may end up getting more because you are the lab head.
So is this a FIU policy or this is
FIU that's FIU's policy. That's if I recall right, at least the most recent one that I know. Maybe Dr. Godavarthi, if she's online, she would know.
Yeah, so as you probably know, it's can be very expensive to file a patent, and so whoever's doing that on your behalf would take part of the would be the assignee, and so so you can imagine if you would have to pay that much money yourself just to file a patent and have it give it its best chance of success. Then that's really a cost that whoever's paying for it will really have some ownership over on the patent. But I would encourage that, and IP and patents, of course, there's different ways to do it. I mean, what people do a lot of times is file what they call a provisional patent application, which is relatively inexpensive. And it covers the idea for just 12 months. And you have to really turn that provisional patent idea into a real patent before the end of 12 months. Otherwise, the idea then goes into what they call the public domain, and you can't ever get it back again. So there's that approach, which gives the 12 months to you to actually explore further to make sure this is really what you want to do. But having patents is critical for a biotechnology company, and it really will bring in, potentially be very lucrative for you later on once you have what they call an exit and you get acquired or merged with somebody else. So, and just moving on, so I think where I left off, we're at the critical point, at least in my journey from moving from after my PhD into the next phase. And for me, that was a postdoctoral research over here in the US. I got what they call a traveling research fellowship grant from the British Heart Foundation, and moved to Atlanta, to Emory University, and did my postdoc there in the Division of Cardiology. And I found that very interesting. It's very different from the experience I had in the UK. It was a little bit more fast-paced and a little bit less relaxed. And so it was different. And maybe that was just cardiology, I don't know. But it was a little bit more intense than the University of Leicester, where I came from. But I stayed at Emory for 4 years altogether. There was 2 years on the postdoctoral grant, and then I was fortunate enough to get a position as instructor in medicine there, for which I stayed for another 2 years. And I learned an awful lot of techniques in the lab there. I was doing mostly biochemistry research on smooth muscle cell proliferation, and in the diseases that we were looking at were restenosis after angioplasty, which was a braid in the inside of blood vessels, mostly in the heart, and some hypertension work as well. And we were able to publish a good deal, and I learned a lot of techniques and learned a lot of histopathology and biochemical analysis, and using a lot of radioactive tracer molecules and in situ hybridization, and very, very varied techniques that when you're doing a postdoc, a lot of those things you have to do yourself. There's nobody else to do them. And if that's what's required in your line of work, in your publications that you want to put out, you have to learn them yourself and gather the data yourself to publish. And so it was a little tedious to learn so many different techniques, but it came into use later on after I moved to industry. Because, and one of the things looking back on it, it was critical to the career that I've had is having the experience of all those different analytical techniques, because they would come up time and time again. And if I didn't know what they were, I wouldn't have known how to find out. But having used them and appreciated what they could do, I could actually put it all in perspective. So I wouldn't be afraid of going out of your way to learn different techniques and understanding how to do them yourself, hands-on. Because there's nothing like knowing or appreciating how difficult they are or how easy they are to perform. Because then when you're looking at a certain question in, say, if you're working in a medical device development project team, and you had a particular question about the next step in development, you had somewhere to think back and say, well, yes, we can do this technique. For example, electrophoresis, you can do that to look at collagen content and different kinds of collagen in your matrix sample. Then you would understand that that could very well be done, and it could be done fairly quickly, and it's not that expensive. And because if you weren't in the know and you didn't know that, you really wouldn't be able to make those suggestions to the rest of the project team. And so those experiences were invaluable for me in knowing and how to use those different techniques.
Could I ask you a question that maybe may be of interest to many people here? Is because you have the experience to be in the academy first and then move to the industry in a way or another, and still keeping active and connecting things from development, research, and then development. What about grants opportunities that allows to link the academia with, in particular, to a small business that just that are initiated by a student after graduation? If there is any opportunity that you could comment.
Yes, absolutely. So when I was doing my postdoctoral work at Emory, I was able to get, I got one of the local Heart Foundation grants, but when I moved to industry is interesting, especially in R&D. The budget for the work in R&D is, depending on the size of the company you're working for, can be fairly varied. It could be very, very tight, and with very little money to do very much exploratory work for new projects. And the money might be very much focused on keeping the products you have on the market in good standing. So it's just looking after line extensions and different changes, small changes to an existing product. And that might be like the size of the budget that you're working with. But then there's, so there's very little money to do things in some companies, except for the fact that you could go for these government grants, the NIH funding. And NIH has many different types of grants, and some I'm sure you're very familiar with in academia, R01s and so on. But in the business world, they have these, what they call the Small Business Innovation Research Grants, SBIRs and STTRs. And those grants are specifically offered to companies, small companies. And when they say small, they're talking about companies with less than, I think it's, if I remember right, less than 350 people in. So there's fairly sizable companies. And you could apply for grant funding to develop a new product. And the grants come in two phases mostly. There's a 6-month initial phase, and then the second phase is about 2 years. The amount of funding is about $100,000 in phase 1 and a couple of $1 million in phase 2. So it's substantial money to fund an idea. And I've been fortunate enough to obtain one of those SBIR grants for developing a new vascular graft. And it was a little painful to write because it's a government grant, and so it's very bureaucratic with all the forms, and they have to be filled out exactly right. Otherwise, the grant will not be reviewed. It'll come back kind of like tax forms. So if you can fill out the grant right, and then really just put your ideas in there with experimental design, it's relatively straightforward to do. And these grants get funded about 3 times a year. And like I mentioned, it's a sizable chunk of money, and it allows you to develop a new product with money that wouldn't otherwise be available to you. So all that you'll be putting out is the time from the company. So whoever you're working for, they would have to give you time to work on the grant, but they wouldn't need to give you all the money, because all the money you would need to develop the product is written into the grant. So so that's one way to get money within a small company that isn't investment from outside. So it's not people like investors that want something back from your company almost immediately, or they want to have a stake or a decision maker position. They don't want to be on your board of directors, for example. So this is what they call non-dilutive funding, meaning you don't have to give up equity in your company for this investment. It just comes in. And it's very useful as you go out then to try and get money from regular investors to say that you've had all this government grant money, because it's very prestigious to be able to get this. And you can almost start your company. I was talking to some colleagues of mine who've done just that. They've started their company only on government NIH grant funding, and then they're not pressured to come out with a device in like 2 weeks, because the grant doesn't have that pressure for them. It's a 2-year grant, and they have 2 years to get to the next step. And all the time, once you've got one grant, it's easy to get another, and so on. So those opportunities is there for small businesses. Which brings me to one point I could chat about. So when I left Emory, I was coaxed out to a startup company in California and started to work for this small pharmaceutical company, and using some of the very techniques I was mentioning. So I was doing a lot of histopathology at Emory, and the work I was doing there, measuring blood vessel sizes. This company in California was doing a study at Yerkes Primate Center, which is out of the Emory campus. And I was measuring some of the histology slides at Emory for this company, sort of because I was there and I could use it potentially as to some of my work I was doing. And they asked me if I was interested in a job, and I went out there and interviewed and got the job. And it's a very difficult decision once you get a job offer for something like that, and you've been in academia for quite some time. It's a little bit of a big move, especially moving across country to the West Coast, and a startup company as well. And so it was an exciting period, and I think it was a time in my life when I was ready for something like that. And I made the move, and it was my first exposure to industry. And it was different in many ways, because it was a startup, small company, which is very different from a big company. It was on the West Coast, which is very different from East Coast. And it was the first industry job. And it was almost like moving from when I described the movement from the University of Leicester environment to the cardiology division at Emory, in the terms that if it was a little bit more intense, fast paced, that's exactly how it was in this first industry job. And I started to learn how to handle myself being a researcher fresh into industry, and all the details and aspects of the environment that were new to me. And so that's something that is going to be a bit of a shock moving into industry. It's very different from academia. Because, I mean, there's a couple of things that are obvious, is that you're now not working for yourself or your department, you're actually working for the bigger company. And if projects don't actually go the way that you would hope, which very often happens in academia, if it happens in industry, you run the risk of that project being closed down overnight, and you have to work on something completely different the next day, which is very foreign to in academia. It's not the norm. And so you really don't have that kind of a control over what you're doing day to day. But there are upsides. The upsides are, I think, depending on how you look at it, the upsides could outweigh those kind of downsides. And the upsides are, industry is usually very well funded, so that obtaining equipment, for example, is really very easy. Obtaining really expensive equipment is easy, because the company has done its homework and decided that we are going to need this very expensive piece of equipment, and so we've budgeted for it, and we've asked for the investment to come in to pay for it, and we planned that out a year ago. So to be able to get those big pieces of equipment is very easy in industry.
There's one student with one question in particular related to the SBIR.
Yes, please.
Yes, that was for me. So it's been my experience, because I've been looking into, applying for the SBIR, that I think the language is somewhere along the line that they don't like that you have a prototype. Are you familiar with this? And is this true?
Well, I think it's better to call it something else. So here's the thing with SBIRs is that there's this dichotomy with getting SBIRs granted. If you go in with too little, what they call preliminary data, you won't get funded because it's too preliminary and you haven't proven out the idea. Then if you go in with too much, then it's the case you're suggesting, then it looks like you've already done the work and you're just taking the money from the grant to use for something else, which is what really happens in reality is just that, is that a lot of times people have already done the work and then they apply for the grant to pay for it. But so one way around it is to not call it a prototype, but just kind of wind it back a little bit in your application. I'm not saying to fudge it, but I'm just saying that you could use what you're calling a prototype as preliminary data to launch to the next level.
Right.
Yeah, and sort of just back off on the language. I think that's the way to approach it. But yeah, if you say that you've already made a prototype and it works, but you're applying for money to create the prototype, then they'll see. I mean, they're responsible fiscally with the money. They'll say, well, we won't pay for that because you've already done it.
Right. So I guess just be very clear on what's been done and what needs to be done.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And just make sure that, put yourself in their shoes and that, what you're asking them to pay for is something reasonable.
Right. All right. Thanks.
Yeah. So back to industry. So I was talking about the equipment and how easy it is to get equipment. The other nice thing in industry is that it generally pays more. So you get compensated a little better than academia. And that is usually one of the driving forces to look at industry as a potential career. And I think there's a lot more potential innovation in industry as well, because very kind of, if you look at it crudely, it's all tied to money. And so whatever you can make and potentially long-term sell, then somebody's going to make some money on it. And so any crazy idea you can think of that has the potential of making money, people will invest in. And so in industry, that you'll find that happens quite a lot. And but it has to be a real idea that's not going to fall down. Otherwise, you won't get the investment, because these investor folks are very diligent in looking over the ideas, and they'll be able to spot something that's going to fail immediately, and they won't fund it. So you have to be careful on what you're proposing, but you'll find that a lot of strange ideas are funded just because there's the potential for money. It's crude, but that's what it is. And so there's lots of opportunities in the bioengineering specialties in industry. There's and across the spectrum of companies that are involved in it. So there's lots and lots of opportunities. And what we were just talking about earlier is that if you have an idea and you don't need heavy investment right up front, you can go the grant route and look for grant funding. And it doesn't have to be NIH grant funding. It could be other local grant funding. There's these biotechnology communities. I mean, there's there's Florida Bio, that I know they have potential funding there too. I came from Atlanta, and Georgia Bio has an event every year, as I'm sure they do here too. And they bring in investors to link up with small companies to start funding the company to actually progress to the next step. Let's see, we're talking about upsides and downsides. So one of the downsides in industry is that it's a bit more difficult to publish. A lot more easy to get IP and patents, but more difficult to publish. And that's probably not a surprise, because you don't want to publish all your best ideas that are covered by patents or trade secrets. So it's more difficult to publish. And in my experience, I was able to very fortunately publish quite a bit in academia early on. And then that kind of trickled down to next to nothing in more recent years. And it became a delight when somebody did want to publish and they got that opportunity.
If there's any experience that you may share with us about any formula, any recipe about diluting shares?
Yeah, so when I put this company together, and I was talking earlier about the information that's available on the internet for deciding how many shares you initially want in the company, and then what you call a cap table is separating out all the shares for the founders, and then saving shares for potential equity for people either that you can't pay any money to, or because you don't have any, or because you want to reward employees later on. So that's kind of how you start with the first place in how many shares you have in the company. Once you get investment into the company, then it has the potential to dilute the shares in the company. So investment through grants that we were talking doesn't have any effect. So that's what they call non-dilutive funding. And it's called non-dilutive because it doesn't dilute your pool of shares. But when you get money coming in from other investors like venture capitalists, they usually will take part of your company in terms of shares. And so let's say you have, I mean, these sound like large numbers, but it's not unusual, like 1 million shares to begin with in your company. But the shares are only valued about 0.01 penny. So you can, if you do the math, your company's only worth a couple of $100. So, but if you have huge investment coming in and they want to take a piece of your company in return for that investment, which is very often the case, they may take, say, 5 or 10% of your company in terms of shares. And so now you've got far fewer shares than you started with. And so the company pool of shares is now diluted. And your piece of it as a founder, or pieces of it that come in later on, pieces of the company that get awarded shares, they don't get so many, or your shares are not worth as much. And so you have to be kind of careful. There's a strategy to it. You have to be careful about taking money from investors. And of course, you need money to actually do anything, but you have to be careful where you take it, at what stages you take it, how much you take, and who you take it from, because different investment groups have different needs. Some people want 5%, some 10%. You just have to be careful about it. So yes, so publications, you get less opportunities to publish. You do get opportunities to go to conferences, which is very nice, although you're in oftentimes you're in a different role. when I've been to conferences in academia, you go to all the sessions, and it's a very rewarding sessions, going listening to the speakers and getting into the very technical discussions. I have found in industry, when you go to conferences, it's quite different. It's a lot of times you find yourself on the exhibit floor, looking around the offerings for each company and getting involved in the sales and marketing teams, which is very, very different from the R&D teams. And you see a side of the industry which you probably hadn't seen until then, which is very interesting. And you see how it all fits together, and how the sales and marketing team go about selling the products that you develop in R&D. But what's really interesting, you get to understand what they need to be able to sell the product, because they need something tangible to show to potential customers, and demonstrations in front of customers at booths is huge for them, because then they get to actually touch and feel things, which is what helps them appreciate the product and help sell products. And so going to meetings from industry is a little different. You still get the opportunity to go to the scientific sessions, but there's a lot more emphasis on you should be spending time on the booth, down in the exhibit hall, looking around all the other products and seeing how we stack up against competition, because it's a good place to see that. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I just want to talk a little bit about career progression. Oh, I've got two things to talk about really quickly. So career progression in industry, there's really two tracks in industry. One is as an individual contributor, which is somebody who's more of a technical person or a subject matter expert in a particular area. And you don't really get to manage a team, but you're actually an expert, and you handle all the technical questions and you write technical reports. And I spent a lot of my time in industry in that role. And then the other role is on the managerial track, where you actually manage people and you manage teams, and you do more interaction with the leadership groups, as opposed to actually getting involved in the technical aspects of day-to-day R&D. And I've done some of that, and I really enjoy both, but they really are two different tracks within industry, and it's probably a good idea to have a sense of where you think your skill set is before going into industry. One of the other things I want to talk about is visas. And when I came over from the UK on my postdoc, I came under a J1 visa, which is a student visa for exchange students. And I was only allowed to be on that visa for 2 years, and then I had to change to a different kind of visa. And this was an area that I really didn't know anything about, immigration law. There were some folks at Emory that did have some knowledge of it and did help a little bit, but still there was a lot of unknowns. And of course, getting on the phone to immigration was very difficult, time consuming. So I got a lot of misinformation about visas, and I was very frustrated about it. After the J1, I got on a H1b Visa. And this is the visa that a lot of folks have in academia that wanting to move into industry. And in fact, a lot of people in industry have as well. The H1b is an occupational visa, specialty occupational visa. And you have to be petitioned by your employer. In my case, it was the university, to work at the university under this visa. And it took a little bit of time, but Emory was pretty good about it, and they were able to do this for me. And it was what I was under for, I think, 2 more years before I got my green card after that. But the H1b visa is something that I've talked to a lot of people about who want to get a career in industry, but they know they need the industry company to sponsor them to actually get this visa so they could work there. And then people already in industry wanting to change jobs to go to a different company, they also realize that the new company that they want to move to would have to do the same thing. They would have to independently sponsor them. And not all companies do this. Now there are, I would imagine, just very crude analysis that I've done. I'm guessing that probably less than maybe 20% of companies are willing to do this, because it's a lot of work for them to be able to have to go through this process of petitioning for H1b visas. But it is a process, and it kind of could be stressful for people wanting to go into companies from industry. And the visas do run out once you have them. I have a colleague of mine that I was working with for some time, moved to, from one of the companies that I was working at, she moved to a new company. And the new company said that they would sponsor for an H1b visa. She already had one visa, but it was about to expire. And so she was in a bit of a dire position because she had to get the new company to sponsor a new visa for her. Otherwise, she would have to leave the country. So it gets very stressful. And she'd been here for some time and very established with roots and with a family here and everything. So it's very stressful. And I know we're almost out of time. I just wanted to give you a little bit of chance to ask any questions before we finish.
Hi, I'm Lakshmani, and I just have a really quick question for you. I'm actually wrapping up my PhD and in the process of job hunting, and I'm also looking at industry jobs. Something that came across was, I would like to understand your perspective on how industrial postdocs work versus a scientist one position, because I believe both are for immediate PhD graduates. So I'm trying to understand what are the different options on my table versus an academic postdoc. So I'd like to hear like what you think about those positions.
Yeah, it's if you think you're going to be moving into industry, then I think that as soon as you can get your feet wet in industry, the better.
Okay.
Because it is a bit of a shock at first, because it's quite different. The emphasis is very different. And if you can get in there and get yourself known and be able to prove yourself, so that people will recognize how great you are in your position, then and get good reviews, that'll give you a really good standing in building your career in that company, and you'll be able to build that equity, if you like, your corporate equity sooner. Okay. And then being able to, especially if you want to move between companies, you'll have that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a good news is we have still 10 more minutes because we are calculating the scores for the posters and the oral presentation. We have very tight case that need to be. We have to look at it a little bit closer and see and to make decisions. And then we have 10 more minutes that we can use for question.
I guess I'm just curious about what role you play now. I guess, is it your company or what is that? I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I think the same sometimes. Yes, it's so. So I was following. So I had the traditional career path. Up until about 18 months ago, I was working on the West Coast again for a startup company. It was actually a company co-funded by Google, and we were actually working inside one of the original Google buildings on the Google campus. So it was a very interesting environment. And I was actually living in Atlanta at the time, so I was doing this commute from Atlanta to San Francisco about every 10 days. I was going back and forth. And my family moved, had the opportunity to move down here to Miami at that time. And so I was ready for a change, and I was also wanting to do full-time consulting. So long story short, we moved down here to Miami, and I started consulting. And I was doing biotechnology consulting for startup companies mostly. A couple of established companies I did work for. And it was mostly preclinical work, regulatory strategy for medical devices. After a while, I was still kind of on the lookout for other opportunities, and something came up in Gainesville, North Florida, and it was a regenerative medicine company looking at wound healing products, and so I joined them middle of last year. It's a very, very small startup company, so it was very interesting to be in at that early stage. And so that's what I'm doing today, is that plus some consulting still on the side. And I'm here, and I wanted to, having gone through this journey, if you like, through academia to industry, I've always had that inkling that someday I would want to get connected back into academia. And I've looked at a few things around here locally. Nothing's really kind of panned out, but I really enjoy mentoring, talking to students such as yourselves, and anybody that will listen or would like to ask questions about just this topic of how you get from academia into industry. What are the things I can expect that are different? Is it possible to move back into academia and questions like that? I really enjoy that. And I did do some lecturing a few years ago, part-time at one of the colleges in Atlanta on medical devices and regulatory affairs. And so I really would like to keep that tie back into academia now that I think my industry career is sort of winding down a little bit.
Awesome. Well, so you mentioned your products are in wound care or wound healing. Are these like topical products, or do you think you could comment on that?
Yeah, they're it's a bit of a weird one. The product is it's a decellularized extracellular matrix, and the extracellular matrix is taken from the skin of an axolotl, and so axolotls are of the salamander family, and so they are animals that regenerate themselves. And that's the properties that the company is using in making its wound healing products. So keeping that regenerative capacity in the extracellular matrix and applying it externally to, the usual diabetic foot ulcers for the main part, and then other wounds. And there is a potential it could prevent scarring as well.
Cool. Nice.
I have a comment. I'm Raj. I just want to say we are very happy that Dr. Ollerenshaw will be also actively involved in at least mentoring one senior design project. We are putting together a nice team, and we already had a couple of meetings with Dr. Ollerenshaw, and there's a good synergy between the team and also one more faculty. So I think we're already quite actively engaging with him, and I also request him to be a part of our IAB activities. So there is a lot more synergy that we see in the future where we can work together in developing this industry university partnership at BME. So I think it's a lot of good opportunities I see, and everything you said today, I could easily connect with almost every detail, relevant and very accurate. Thank you.
Yes, no, I really appreciate you encouraging me to be a part of this and the project teams. I'm really enjoying it so far. but yes, I've done a good bit of work in neuromodulation. And I mean, as I mentioned, I've had a lot of experiences in medical device development, and neuromodulation was one of the big pieces recently, and mostly involved in pain management. And we're trying to block acute and chronic pain by nerve stimulation with high frequency nerve block. And so from there, I got to learn a bit about neuromodulation. And so that's kind of where some of these ideas for treating CNS disorders came from.
Thank you. We look forward to more engagements and stronger engagements in the near future.
Thank you. Yeah. Let's see if there's anything I've missed that I was wanted to cover.
You mind if I ask a question, Dr. Ollerenshaw?
Sure.
Hi, my name is Maida. I'm also a PhD student here at FIU BME. I'm wondering about the openness of these companies to, if you want to make our own job, especially the, startup companies, if you want, how well are they on the discussion of, I believe that this position is necessary for your company and we advocate for it, and then see if we can land that specific position that we want. And also, me, myself personally, I'm really, the location is very important for me. So I'm really focused on the location, but as you know, the biomedical engineering, it's mostly focused on the Northeast, is the Southwest. And so I was wondering how we can approach that, especially in the COVID area, that I think we're not going to be able to network at least another 2 months in person, and it's all going to be Zoom. So just getting your ideas on all of that would be nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've thought about this location question quite a lot, and I've asked people about it. Why, for example, I spent a lot of time in Atlanta, and Atlanta has been trying to build a center for biotechnology for years, and they haven't managed it. They've tried various things, but there really isn't any reason why they shouldn't be able to. I mean, because they have the universities there. They have Georgia Tech and Emory and Georgia State and even University of Georgia. I mean, they're all right there. There's no reason why they shouldn't be able to do it. And I asked somebody that question, why it wasn't happening. And the ugly truth is that it all comes down to money. For some reason, the investment isn't in Atlanta for biotechnology. And I don't know if that's because it's not a cool area for biotech. The people are not investing in it, but because of that, it's just not happening. You see it obviously out on the West Coast because it is a cool area. Everybody's Silicon Valley. It's right there. It's where it all is. And I can tell you, I mean, it's really exciting to be there because there's so much in a small area. Everywhere you look, you have all these companies. It's on every corner. These major these .coms, as they used to call them, companies, all right there. But Atlanta hasn't happened. So yes, the Boston area has a good bit. Austin, Texas has some, but nothing. In New York a little bit, but nothing quite the same as California has, and it's all because of the money. Now, I had an opportunity early on in my career to go to California and work in that first industry job, and you have to be flexible. It didn't turn out for me at the time, and I moved back to Atlanta after 2 years, I think. But the upside of being out there was that I did have 2 biotech jobs out there. The second one was more exciting than the first, just because it was weird. It was working for a pathologist who was making drug-coated stents for cardiovascular disease. But he was a vitamin salesman from New York, upstate New York. But he had some money and he started this company. the weirdest part, I guess, was that he had some friends in the movie industry because he was a physician to Burt Reynolds and and Sylvester Stallone and some of these people, and he would tell me that, yeah, Clint Eastwood's invested in the company. We'll have Clint over and you'll meet him and all this. And I thought, yeah, right. That's never going to happen. It happened twice. So it's an exciting place out there.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
I think there was another question
What
in there.
about bringing the job there? How open are they about bringing the job there? If we want to offer something. So for example, you point out a really good point, like, okay, I do want, for example, Florida to be the next hot point for biomedical engineering. We have all these graduates. Why don't we make a local station over here? And I'm not going to be interested in running a company for the next 5 years, but I do want to bring the job here. So any ideas on that side, how to approach it? I mean, you were talking about money. Are you talking about like government money mostly, or just
no, private money? Yeah, these are in venture capital money. It's big money, and they are a little set in their ways oftentimes, and they like to congregate in these centers of biotechnology because it looks good for them, and they like to stay in one place. However, having said that, if you have a killer idea and it's going well, they're going to invest in it no matter where it is, and they might want to move you somewhere else. But so that's what I was saying about giving up control of the company. If you take their money and you give them enough equity to have them to tell you, oh, you're going to have to move to the West Coast, you can't really do much about it.
So Made, the good news is that I've been hearing there that Miami is actually on its way to become one of the, it's going to become the next tech hotspot.
Nice.
So, so I hear all these, meetings where VCs are saying, I'm moving from New York City to Miami. I'm moving from California to Miami. I'm moving to Miami because that's the next place to go.
Yeah.
And along that, along those lines, I wanted to comment that, it was really exciting to hear you say that you actually ventured into neuromodulation. We are, probably one of the few very, very selected group of labs, academic labs, that's actually running first in human trials with implantable neurostimulators who have an IDE from the FDA. So like, I hear you talking about, academia and industry, and here we are sort of merging the two together, doing real translational work. And I never thought I was going to be in academia and still looking into talking to VCs, learning how to prepare a pitch, learning how to take these ideas out into, doing market valuations and trying to see how, the same person that's doing the academic research, that's doing all the studies, is looking into all these market aspects. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, great. No, I like.
We have winners already.
I like what you're saying about the Miami becoming a tech center, because it's horrendously expensive to live out in the Bay Area, in Silicon Valley. It's horrendous, and so most people out there would much rather move somewhere else because it's terrible. And Miami is amazing. There's no reason why it shouldn't be the next tech center for biotechnology. And I think it's an amazing place. So colorful.
So guys, I'm sorry, I have to, we have to finish this very interesting conversation with Dr. Ollerenshaw. Very nice. Thank you for being here with us and share this valuable experience that takes a year to accumulate. And I'm sure the students have enjoyed this conversation a lot.